Welcome. I'm Ron Baker. I'm the director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Center. We're sponsored by Small Church Connections here in Canada. And today we have another guest in our series of podcasts called This Is Us, Canadian Small Churches in Ministry. Our guest is coming from a small town called Winnipeg and works within and understands well small churches. And well, you know what? I'm giving it all away. I'm going to let you introduce yourself. So why don't I just turn this over and yeah, go ahead, introduce yourself, take her away, and then we'll just run with it.
Well, thanks, Ron. My name's Tim Nielsen. I'm the pastor of City Church in Winnipeg. For those listening, Winnipeg's not exactly a small town, but not mega either. Mm-hmm. And my addiction in life is refugees. That is one that I have no intention of kicking the habit. I care about refugees deeply. Mm. And that has turned into a church plant some 13 years ago.
Okay. And as you look to your own background, how did you end up in ministry? Where does this all come from?
Well, it actually started back in Bible school. I had a requirement to spend one summer in ministry, and I ended up on a reserve in BC for a summer, and it was cross-cultural, and I just that hooked me. I loved that experience so much that summer, and then continued on pursuing the whole idea of ethnic specific ministry for many years. I started off working among Spanish people in Illinois for a while, and met my wife in BC, and in joint training, what was back then called Mission Cooperative Outreach, was a joint training session among Native ministries. And then we ended up in Winnipeg doing Native ministry. And from that, we did about 20 years of indigenous ministry. But along the way, we began working with refugees, and the Lord began to draw our heart to refugees. And we still have really good relationships with indigenous community, but spend our time mostly working with refugees or former refugees.
Ah, great. Well, you've planted a church in Winnipeg. Mm-hmm. What is the makeup of that church? How would it look if I were to say, come and join in and be part of the group? And what would I be coming into?
Yeah, the ethnic makeup to begin with, we have a large portion of our congregation comes from Myanmar or Burma, two tribal groups, the Chin and the Karen. And then as well, we have Eritreans, we have Pakistani, we have Somalians, we have people from the Congo, and then as well from India, and Nigeria, and a few other nations, a sprinkling of other countries, including Colombia, and then Canadians.
This sounds very global.
It is. It's very what we call intentionally intercultural.
Okay. And I mean, very intercultural, no question about it. But how? I'm speaking from a small church perspective here. How can that survive? Can that kind of ethnicity mix survive?
It's a great question you're asking, because there's different needs to different age groups, and different needs to the longevity, how long people have been in Canada. So the answer is not simple. It's actually quite complex. But I would say the short answer to your question is yes, as we've been doing it for 13 years, and with ups and downs. But yes, it is very doable. So let me explain a few of those.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to hear it.
So when a newcomer comes to Canada, and I'm thinking more in terms of refugee than professional immigrant, there are some differences there.
Yeah.
When a former refugee lands in Canada, depending on their refugee situation, the average length of time that people have been in the refugee camp is 17 years.
Oh.
And of all the refugees in the world, only 1% are ever able to settle in a third country like Canada. And 1% are able to settle in the country in which they're a refugee, and 1% are able to return back to their country, leaving 97% stuck. So that
Okay.
the people then who come to Canada, if they've been in refugee camps for a long time, depending on their situation, but they are not likely to get good paying jobs in Canada. Their children are more likely to advance, and then their grandchildren further.
Mhm.
So these older refugees will come often with less English background, and the ethnic specific church is probably more what's going to appeal to them. It's going to be more what they need, depending if they're coming to Canada as Christians. I'm speaking as that,
Yeah.
because there's also evangelism that we do as well, and that's a different topic, a different part of what we're doing. So those who have come and they're older, they're going to need an ethnic specific service to meet their needs. So in our case, we have an intercultural service at 10:30, which probably has about 120 people attending.
Mhm.
And then we have a chin service. Well, we have a Karen service at 1 o'clock, a chin service at 3 o'clock, an Eritrean service at 6 o'clock, and a Punjabi service at 6. And that one's more evangelistic, that service. So that meets some of those needs. But then the younger people who are spending their day in their days in public school, they're mixing. Their friends are Canadian. They're speaking English all the time. They're watching movies in English. The church then they need a church that also worships in English.
Mhm.
Okay. However, it depends on how old they are when they come, because if they come in their later teenage years, they're often the ones who are still wanting ethnic specific services. It's going to be the younger ones as they work their way through. And that older teenage group, young adult one, often they're more desiring to keep their ethnicity and their heritage alive through the church than the younger and the older people are. The older people understand that there's going to be change. The younger people are wanting English, but that middle group is often wanting their cultural identity. Who are they? And so they look to the church to identify. And my own thinking is the church is not the best place to make cultural identity. The church is the place to worship together. And then if you want to teach your language classes, do it on Saturday, hold your festivities, celebrate, but the church is not the place to do that. It's the place to express it, but not preserve it.
Okay, you've brought up about 1,000 questions to me right now, just
Sure.
thinking into that whole area of refugee and I guess you call it a subcategory of immigrants. With that whole area of refugees, and you've talked about 3 different groupings. I'm looking particularly with a group that I have affiliation with. A number of the young adults break quickly in Tagalog and then quickly return back to English. How do they create their own identity both within a church and in Christ?
Well, that's an extremely good question. First of all, the question of Christian identity is something that every Christian needs to work to, including those of us of Caucasian background, because it's not one and the same. Our Caucasian background is not identical to Christianity either,
Right.
Nor is it for any newcomer. So all of us have to work through what is a biblical Christian culture and what does that look like. So that would be one thing, and how you express that. In terms of the young adults and the expression of it, that's probably where they do need to be involved in some form with an ethnic specific church model, but it's their children that are going to need the intercultural church, and they themselves as well. So what we do in the intercultural service is it's not all English. Our special music, for example, we try to have it in various languages.
Mm,
So we'll have Karen, we'll have those from Eritrea singing, we'll have Swahili songs. And then on the PowerPoint, we have it in English so that you
right.
can follow through and follow, and that allows them to feel comfortable. But the preaching is in English, and then we, using infrared translation devices, we have simultaneous translation taking place.
Okay, I'm going to jump into a whole other question here, which is I've watched within a number of different communities and different ethnic communities that hospitality seems to be a very important part of that ability to work together with. I'll let you jump in and just take it away on that.
It is essential, Ron. If one approaches ministry as only being on Sunday morning and maybe your small group, you're not going to launch an intercultural church.
Okay.
It is meant to be friendship and hospitality, both going to and hosting. So my wife and I spend a lot of time, very enjoyable times, in many different homes, and just enjoying their company, praying together, and of course the side benefit is the meals, which are amazing.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. So yeah. So we enjoy those meals and we enjoy the hospitality, and we get to hear their stories and become friends. And friendship is the whole key to making the intercultural church work. As you build friendships and you show that kind of care and that love, it develops. But what's really exciting is when cultures that are not native or haven't been in Canada long become friends with each other. So that is always really beautiful. So maybe a Pakistani Christian with someone from Myanmar, and that I see happening, or other cross relationships. And that's the beauty of the cross-cultural church, or the intercultural church. It's just absolutely beautiful.
And I just love being with people. I guess that brings up a question that I'm seeing and dealing with during a pandemic or a COVID situation, or whatever we want to call what's happening right now, is the question of, what is the church? What really is the most effective way of, both for evangelism, but also discipleship and many other things? We've learned to be a very good performance-oriented group, but what makes up what makes up the church? I'll let you run with whatever you're thinking about that.
Well, I mean, when I think about City Church, it's both the spiritual and natural giftings of the people working together and complementing each other, and accepting people for who they are and how they are. And so we letting people express themselves and their worldview, and without judgment, keeping in line with Scripture as much as possible, but letting it express itself freely. It's the way to go. Now, you had mentioned the whole COVID time, and so the intercultural church really suffered under that time, because Zoom did not work very well for the intercultural church. It really didn't. And I was a little concerned what it would be like when we could start regathering. But when we started regathering, almost everybody came back and were excited to see each other. And they had been gathering in Zoom with their own ethnic meetings because that would work. But the intercultural Zoom just did not work. You need to be in person for that. And I've been really encouraged by how much people missed each other and that love that they had for each other, and how they encourage each other with Scripture and song, how they pray for each other. It's just so encouraging.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, is that going to change how we do church, or are there things that you're starting to see out of that?
Well, City Church was never a performance-based church. to give you some context, actually, we were given a building by a donor when we planted the church back in 2008, and the church was actually First English Lutheran Church, which was
Okay.
interesting in itself because it was the first English-speaking Lutheran church in Manitoba, Northwest Saskatchewan, Northwest Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Northern Minnesota. And
Oh,
it was
wow.
considered a rebel church among the Lutheran at the time. And so it's kind of neat that we planted an intercultural church, which is kind of rebel as well.
Mhm.
But it's a beautiful building with stained glass windows and everything in it, and absolutely beautiful. And it's definitely not the place to do a contemporary worship service you couldn't even block off all the lights because all the stained glass windows,
Mhm.
and nor would we want to. And we have never been about performance. And believe me, if it's performance, you'd be pulling people off the stage because it doesn't meet the criteria, and that, of performance. But when it's heart, oh man, it's wonderful. And whether we should or not, after special music, each time we all are applauding each other
Yeah.
and encouraging each other. And it's just a wonderful time together. And we don't watch the clock carefully. We made an hour and a half service, often goes an hour and 45 minutes, sometimes 2 hours. I don't think we're ever less than an hour and a half. We're not time oriented, we're event oriented.
Yeah.
And so people who join us have to be of that kind of thinking. So many of the established Canadian friends like to visit, but they don't want to make it their church for those reasons. They want to take the roast out on time. It's going to burn at home or something. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And those potatoes. Yeah.
Okay. Exactly. Which, by the way, we've kind of found to be kind of dull after eating Eritrean food and Pakistani food.
Do you run potlucks after
We
church?
do, and they're fantastic. Oh, they're wonderful. Yeah. They're great.
Yeah. I find that kind of hospitality just brings everybody together.
It's fun. Yeah. It's fun. Yeah.
Oh, you're not kidding. No. Now, let me just ask a question about, when you have intercultural, you have multicultural, you have different groups. Is there a sense in your intercultural service in which one major ethnic group approach becomes how everybody else has to sort of do their thing?
No, I'd say not. Although probably, unfortunately, if we're leaning any direction, it probably is the Canadian established way.
Yeah.
I mean, keeping in mind, we're working with a lot of people who became believers overseas, came here, and their churches were planted by missionaries. So
Yes.
they're going to take some of that same structure, and they feel comfortable within that same structure. So no, I'd say not. I'd say overall, it fits together pretty good.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So let's say and I work with a school and with a number of young people that want to go into ministry. How do they prepare for a intercultural, multicultural type of ministry? A small church, that type of thing. How would they prepare best?
Well, I would say one of the things to do is, personally, this is my own thinking, and I would say live in an urban center for a while, and attend an urban church. If you're taking seminary, look for seminaries that are in urban settings, that you can develop those kind of relationships and build those kind of friendships. It's not that the small communities don't have newcomers in them, or what we used to consider, but the diversity in an urban center is such that there's so many opportunities. So that's the first thing. And build as many friendships as you can. Interestingly enough, linguistics is not required for the intercultural church because there are so many culture groups you're working with. It could be to your advantage, but it's not required.
Okay, I'd love to explore that a little further with you. Just, my understanding over the years, and particularly if you want to call it mission work or whatever, is that you want to immerse yourself.
It would be true if you're doing ethnic specific church,
Mm-hmm.
or if you're very gifted linguistically and you can learn several languages, that's great. But it's not required because the basis of the common language that we're using is English.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, yes, learn some phrases and some words, but that's not the requirement. The requirement really is relational, love, concern, interest in them, interest in their history, interest in their personal story, and considering them your equal. And that part about being equal is very important. And that you do not consider yourself more important, of course. That's an old missionary thought, or at least
sounds biblical to me too.
Right. Yeah. But nor do you consider yourself under or less. You just consider yourself equal. They are your brothers and sisters in Christ. Mm-hmm. You have something to contribute to them. They have something to contribute to you. And that you approach them on that basis. And there's, it's a really beautiful relationship that you can enter into. It's a healthy relationship.
Yeah, which to me, that ministry training and preparation, I think we need to work on a lot of those principles.
Yeah, well, I think internships in intercultural churches would be one of the ways to do it, or even ethnic specific churches. That can be beneficial towards developing that. So
you also worked in Indigenous work for a number of years here in Canada. And out of that very, I'll call it ethnic specific group, if we can use that term, what did you learn as we as Canadians are looking at ourselves and trying to figure out who we are and what we are? What type of things would you add to that?
In terms of what, Ron?
Well, I think I mean, we're running in paths of truth and reconciliation. How does the church work with that? And intercultural really makes it very weird, because you're not just dealing with one culture and one approach, but
yeah. Well, I would say in terms of reconciliation, hear the stories of abuse, weep with those who weep. They are legitimate stories actually that we heard long before that they came out. And anyone working in the Indigenous communities had heard these stories, including the residential school stories we had been hearing. To walk with them, to love those who are grieving, those who have addictions as a result of much of what's taken place. And again, it's going to be relationships and friendships, and some of those friendships will need to span the decades, not even the years, but the decades. And we have relationships that span 3 decades. And one of those relationships, actually, a gal that we had been working with and caring about us, was baptized just this last year. I think we had worked with her for 25 years or more. And it's love and treating them literally like your own brother, literally like your own sister. How would you treat your own brother or your own sister? That's how we're to treat those we're working with and alongside with.
Oh, wow. You've made some amazing points about equality and about how we work together. We work together, I guess, the way to put it. If I were to come on a Sunday to your church, I come to the intercultural service, how would I be welcomed in? What type of things have you seen that have worked in that?
Well, I think the one thing that we try to do, and there's a number of us at church that try to do it imperfectly, I want to say imperfect. To a newcomer, we try to get to know them early on. We try to invite them over for lunch and just to get to know them, or coffee sometime in the week, or if you can sense that they're not feeling quite comfortable with that, just making it an offer to be taken up at another time. And that's about all you can do on the first day that somebody comes, because you don't want to pressure them or make them feel obligated. Some need to just come a few times before that. But it is to look, for us, what my wife and I would do for someone who's new, we wouldn't visit them in their home right away. We'd invite them to our home first. I think that makes them feel more comfortable, but depends on the culture. some culture groups it's normal to, say, can I come and visit you?
Yeah.
And if you back the clock up in Canada, you'll remember that visitation of pastoral visitation used to be a big part of a pastor's job. And it's
Oh, yeah.
unfortunate, but it's gone. And I mean, unless they're in the hospital or something, and even now with COVID, you can't even do that.
Yeah.
But among the newcomer community, whether it be professional immigrant or refugee, visiting them in their homes after you have that permission,
Yeah.
is really beneficial. It's appreciated. They feel loved, cared for. It's astounding what that does.
Yeah. Well, I hate to say it, but we've been running along here, and we're coming close to about the time that we usually finish up a podcast here. So I don't want to cut us off here, because I'm just sort of, my mind is again running around, and I'm finding all sorts of things that I'd love to ask. Multicultural, intercultural, hospitality, relationship, all of those things just go into how. Let me ask now finally a really weird question. Why small churches?
Because small churches, you can build relationships within, and it's a family. And in an intercultural church, you want family. It's not a show, it's not a performance, it's a family. And that's the beauty of a small church, intercultural small church. It's family. If we became 1,000 people, we wouldn't know each other, and it would turn into performance, and it would probably also break up into ethnic specific churches.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Would happen. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Tim. This has been great. As I say, I'm processing, and I will continue to process. I appreciate it because of my own situation and the pastoring that I'm doing right now. It's helpful to know and helpful to think about. So I want to say thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Ron. It was my pleasure to be with you.